for you, and today I want to rant a little bit with you guys. I think it'll be a fun rant. I think we'll have some enjoyment out of it, but I want to talk about things that I keep seeing as a reviewer, and I see it on other people's channels as well, where a knife company has done something that really messes up their knife in terms of performance and just makes it something that I can't recommend, the other reviewer can't recommend, that people aren't going to enjoy. Now, I don't have good examples of all of the complaints that I'm going to make. In fact, all the knives you see before you are fantastic knives, and they don't commit most of these knife sins that I'm going to talk about. But, and that's because the knives that do commit those sins, you don't keep them around, right? And I'm sure you guys don't either. So here, what I want to do is talk to you guys about issues that I keep seeing over and over again. These are things that if you hear about them on a knife, you should avoid. And if you buy a knife that has that problem, contact the company and tell them, this is why I'm getting rid of this, because it's only through that good communication from consumers that manufacturers can figure out, hey, we took a misstep here and we need to make adjustments. All right. And that's all this video is meant to be, is constructive criticism that can be helpful to the knife world in general, to all of you as users, but also to companies who are making these knives and who are committing these knife sins that we're going to bring up. I use that phraseology, I guess, maybe because I'm a minister, but I'm sure you guys could have a list of your own down in the comments, and I would love for you to do that. So down below, go ahead and put in there, hey, I got a knife and it had this issue or that issue, and it really, really ruined the knife for me. I'd love to hear those things. I'd love to have a discussion about it down in the comments below. It would be even really a lot of fun if we disagreed about some stuff and could have, a bit of a debate down there. I'm a big fan of open dialogue, especially healthy disagreement. So I'd love to have your comments down below and your stories about things that fit into this list from your own experience. Finally, the other thing I'd love to have you do is I'm going to put in the description box links to White Mountain Knives as well as my Amazon store. You guys do use those links a bit. I would love for you to keep doing that. Use it even more, especially if you're going to buy a knife anyway. You may as well get 10% off. So thank you for those of you who have already done that. For those of you who haven't, or for those of you who have in the past, keep doing it. It does help the channel a lot. It makes a big, big difference in what I'm able to do in terms of the knives I'm able to get and the content I'm able to bring to you guys. Finally, I've got one more huge thank you to send out there, and that is to those of you, and I've had a number of offers recently of knives coming in for review. A huge thank you. There are so many knives that I just could never get for the channel, and having someone who's willing to say, hey, Kevin, borrow my knife for a little bit and then send it back to me, that's a huge benefit, not only to me, of course, but all of the viewers get to see those knives as well. So huge thank you to those of you who've been doing that lately and who've done it in the past. There are quite a few of you out there. All right, finally, let's get into the list. I've divided this into sort of mechanical problems where there's a problem with the way this has been built. Okay, secondly, ergonomic problems. That is, there's a problem with how this feels in hand or how it gets overly uncomfortable as time wears on. And then finally, I've got some issues about materials at the end. And then I'll have some final thoughts about why I'm so passionate about this particular discussion. So let's go ahead and get into the discussion we want to have here, beginning with mechanical problems. These are choices you make about how big something is or how something's going to be put together. And the first one is going to be stop pins. Now, this one is not too bad, but I consistently see stop pins on knives, even knives that are labeled as hard use, heavy duty knives that are so thin, it looks like they cut a piece out of a coat hanger and shoved it in there. And it's just so fine that it doesn't inspire any confidence at all. A great example of the right way to do this is the Sebenza. Look at that. That is what a stop pin should look like. That's fantastic. And that's what I want to see in all knives. So if you're making a knife, especially if you're claiming it's a hard use knife, make sure that stop pin is substantial. Here's another good example, the ZT 0640, nice big stop in there, not as big as the Sebenza, which again shows you one of the reasons I like the Sebenza as much as I do. Maybe three knives are better on screen here, but my first gripe is stop pins. Please, if you're going to make a hard use knife, if you're claiming that it's heavy duty and tough and can take a beating and all of this, make sure that you back up what you're saying by putting overbuilt components in there that really will take a beating. Secondly is blade geometry. So this is a Rat Model 1, great cutting knife. It's fairly thin behind the edge. It's got a nice secondary bevel. And by the way, one of the things that Pete over at Cedric Nada has showed us is that most of these steels will perform better with a steeper grind. That is, with a tighter angle on the secondary bevel there. But a lot of times I see companies put out knives that have an extremely obtuse secondary bevel and which are too thick behind the edge anyway. So what I mean by too thick behind the edge is this dimension right here, just behind that secondary bevel, is quite thick. And it means the knife doesn't cut very well, okay? And so I recently had this discussion with someone who said, well, if the knife's sharp, it should cut. And I'm like, well, no, it's about more than that. It's about how much material is down here, what angles are involved down here. And a knife can be razor sharp, that is, have an extremely, extremely fine apex here on the secondary bevel. But if that secondary bevel is a poor angle, or if it has so much material behind it that you can't move through a substrate, then it's not good, okay? So too thick behind the edge and too obtuse of an angle, both are problems. Make sure the lock has good, solid geometry, okay? So especially in something like, so here's a liner lock, but you can see the liner lock here is going to interface with the bottom of this blade in a particular way, all right? That interface, where those two things meet up, how steep the angle is, right? If it's off, so that if they don't meet up perfectly, if this one's this angle and this one's that angle, right? There are all kinds of ways you can get that wrong, and you just can't do it. It makes for a crappy lockup, and you'll end up with someone making a video where all of your knives fail spine whack tests because the geometry is poor in terms of how the lock interfaces with the tang of the blade. All right, next, detent. Detent seems like something that many companies really struggle with. And the most frustrating thing about this is, so I've got a Bestech right here. This is the Bestech Horus. This is actually for sale. I don't know if my review has posted yet, but maybe I'll make a note on the review video when it posts. It's already recorded. Anyway, this is a Bestech. It's really, really nice. But Bestech has this whole budget line that has just these great, snappy detents, and every single one is fantastic that I have handled. And many of you have reported how good they are. So these are knives that come in like under $50. And then I get a knife from a really expensive company. You know, maybe it's a high-end Spyderco or Zero Tolerance. Not usually Zero Tolerance, they tend to get it right. But, you know, it's a higher-end, more expensive knife, and the detent is bad. And I don't get it. At this day and age, one of the big things that consumers are looking for. Now, you could push back on me, right? And you could say, Kevin, you know, if action is the reason you're buying knives, then you're doing it wrong, okay? And I get that to a certain extent, because a knife is a tool, and if it cuts well and it has a good handle, who really cares how the pivot feels? And I totally, totally get that, all right? I do. I view new knives as tools just like many of you do, but if you design something to function a certain way, so if you put a flipper on your knife, and I'm going to see if I can purposely fail this one. So here, I'm going to try this. So if you put a flipper on your knife, and I can overcome it, I'm going to have to be careful. Maybe I'll just mess it up. There we go. So if I'm overcoming the detent and the knife blade doesn't do that, all right? If I overcome the detent and the knife blade does that, that's a problem. You messed up the detent. All right, now this one's actually not that bad. It's a little softer than I would like, but it consistently deploys when I want it to, unless I try to purposely fail on camera. So, but the problem is, unlike that knife, which is not that bad, there are many, many knives that are bad, where the detent is really, really poor. And that's something that should be pretty easy to establish. Maybe it's not easy to set it exactly right the first time, but most of these companies have been making flippers for years. They should have it figured out. And if you don't have it figured out, then stop, figure it out, and then send all your knives out to retailers, right? Make sure it's good. Okay, the blade should open when I push on the flipper tab, and it shouldn't be so stiff that I'm sitting here pushing, my fingers turning red, and I'm grunting trying to get it to open. It should just, I push on it and it deploys. That's all we're looking for, okay? And I'm not overly picky about that, right? It doesn't have to be super snappy for me. If it's, as long as I say, as long as I push on the flipper tab and the knife deploys, that's all I ask. And that, because of that, there's lots of knives that I like and have no complaints about that others have said, oh, the detent's terrible. Honestly, I'm not being overly picky here. If the knife deploys when I want it to, that's all I'm looking for. So please make sure that it does. Okay, blade play, of course. If you've been around this channel for more than 5 minutes, you know I can't tolerate any blade play of any kind in any direction. There's no excuse for it, right? This is the current year. I don't even, whatever year it is you're watching this, right? This is 2019, but if it's 2020 or 2023 or whatever, we can send someone to the moon. We darn well better be able to make a knife that locks up solid. And if you can't, right, if you have a lock that you've tried everything and you just can't get it to be consistently solid, then drop that lock. Don't use it because it's obviously a crappy design, okay? All right, I'm gonna stop. That one really makes me nuts though. Okay, the next one on my list, and I don't have a good example of this, so I'm just gonna have to tell you, sometimes I get a knife here for review, and I open it up and I look down just like this, and I see right here a liner that is paper thin. All right, that makes me crazy. There's, again, no excuse. This is supposed to keep the blade from closing on my hand, for crying out loud. It's got a pretty important job. Make sure that it's up to the task, okay? Make sure that I've got something substantial here so I'm not worried about it. And really what I love to see is something like this, where, look at this guy. Beautiful thick liner. That's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of, that I would love to see this on every knife, okay? I know some of you would be like, Kevin, they'd all be too heavy, but honestly, I would carry the extra ounce on every knife to get a liner that thick all the time. I'd be happy to see it. So that's the next. Oh yeah, lock stick or lock slip. Again, now a little bit of lock stick, that is a little pop. I won't do it on this knife because this one's really good. But if your knife is like a little bit, there's just that little bit of when you unlock it, that's not really considered a lock stick. That's just really good lock geometry and a really solid lockup. When you have a lock stick, I've seen guys, and I've had knives where you open it up and you've got to actually stick a pry tool in here and pop the block back over. It's that bad. And that's a real fail and just shouldn't be, knives shouldn't be going out like that. One, they should have a stainless steel lock bar insert, and if not, it should be, you should have hardened the titanium to such an extent that it's not deforming that little bit and causing that lock stick. Same is true of lock slip or lock rock. All of those, and largely, you know what, a stainless steel lock bar insert solves most of those problems, and as long as you get the geometry right, that's probably the easiest solution. Okay, so that's my that's my discussion on lock slip or lock stick. Finally, and this is one I continue to see, and I've got a knife here that really had this problem. This one doesn't because it's been adjusted, okay? But there are so many knives out there, and it tends to especially be a problem with milled titanium clips. It's not exclusively a problem for titanium clips, but it often is that this little space right in here is not wide enough to accommodate certain pants. Now this one is really nice, all right? Initially, these ones from factory were way too thin. And if you looked at one from factory, this would be way flattened out. It'd be somewhere down here where my thumbnail is right now. And there just isn't enough space there for many, many pairs of pants, okay? And this is one that really perplexes me, because it's not like it's a mystery. You know, I can just picture, you know, everyone standing around the manufacturing shop or the design shop going, you know, we have this problem where sometimes clips don't allow enough space for pants to fit in. And I just can't figure out how we could ever test to see whether or not our clip is good. You know, are they all standing around in their underwear? Like, what's the story here that they can't figure it out? Get the knife, try and put it in your pants. Make sure you're wearing jeans instead of dress pants. All right, maybe that's half the problem. There's too many people sitting around boardrooms and not enough people wearing jeans to work, okay? But go get a pair of jeans and try to put the knife in. And if it doesn't fit, you did it wrong, okay? Do it again. Get it right the next time. That's so simple, or it seems so simple, and yet people consistently, over and over, every year, right? There's going to be a hot new knife that everyone loves that will not fit into someone's pocket, and it makes me insane. Okay, now related to that, let's move on now. Oh, there's one other complaint I have here, and that is free spinning pivots. I don't really have any examples of a free spinning pivot here. Maybe this one is. No, I don't think it is either. But you guys all know what I mean. So you go to adjust this lock and you go to spin here, and you notice as you're spinning the screw on this side, it's just spinning on this side. Okay, well, this is a solved problem. All right, it's not like we don't know how to make sure that doesn't happen. All you need to do is make a D-shaped pivot screw. Okay, so D-shaped means, right, it's flat on one side. So when I slide this through, I slide it through a D-shaped hole and it's a D-shaped pivot, and now it can't spin, right? Problem solved. I don't know why this continues to be an issue when, again, it's like making a car without seatbelts. Everyone knows what the problem is. Everyone knows how to solve it. There's just no excuse for making a knife that doesn't have some way of restraining the pivot. Okay, so here's, this guy has a hex bolt on this side. Now, there's been some questions. Some people have complained that their hex bolt wasn't properly sized and it spun as well, which again is, just don't do that, right? Okay, moving on. What else have we got here? I don't have another one I don't have an example of, but you've probably seen this before. So here's a lanyard hole. This is, I'm not in love with the location of this lanyard hole because I think it does detract from the design a little bit. It's much nicer to hide it back here in the backspacer. That's probably the best way of doing it. But from time to time, I'll see a backspacer where we've got the backspacer going along, and then it's got a giant lump on it to accommodate a lanyard. And I look at it and go, really? That was out of all the places that you could have located your lanyard hole, you put it in the one place my hand has to go. So now there's a giant bump under my hand when I'm trying to cut stuff. What is the deal, right? Like it's just, why? Okay. Well, I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker here. I've still got a number to get through. So a bunch of choils, okay? And especially this seems to be popular on, Mall Ninja tactical crap. You get a choil here, a choil here, a choil here, a choil here, all the way back. Well, that's great. And I'm sure what they're trying to do is increase retention in hand. But the problem is, if you get people that have different sized fingers, which it turns out most humans have, then you're going to get some people who don't fit the knife very well. And a lot of people are going to complain about the knife being uncomfortable. Now, most people have enough sense to not do anything like that on the back. There is one Wii knife that has like scales on the back. And it was like the one place I need to hold on, we're going to put spikes on it, right? But anyway, I will say I have one little funny story. I was at... I was somewhere recently where I was handling a few different knives, and one of the guys picked up a heater knife and actually got cut on their hand from the handle of the knife. And I'm like, no, if your handle's cutting people, you've got something really, really wrong, right? It's exactly backwards. Okay. Now, the next thing I've got to talk about in terms of mechanical choices and the way a knife is put together is inaccessible lock bars. This is something I see all the time. So I open the knife and I go to get at this lock bar to push it over, and notice how nice and easy that is, and how I'm not, my finger's not all white, and I'm not figuring out exactly how I'm going to get it in there, and I'm not coming around here and doing this kind of thing, which I have had to do before. That drives me crazy. Make sure that your lock bar is accessible and that everyone can get a hold of it, even if they have slightly larger hands. And I figured out what's going on here, right? I think what's happening is the companies that make their knives in sweatshops, all the little kids working in the sweatshop, they've got these little tiny fingers, so they can easily get them into even the smallest gap, and you end up with knives that, yeah, sure, the little kids working away in your sweatshop can make it happen, but no grown adults can make your knife work, all right? Maybe it's Oompa Loompas or something, but anyway, normal human adults cannot get their finger into your lock bar. Now look, again, I'm not overly complaining about this. I don't mind strong lock bar tension. In fact, I like strong lock bar tension. It gives me more confidence in the lock, but I need to be able to access the lock, right? So notice how I've got all this space. I can easily get my thumb here. I can push the knife over, no problem whatsoever. That's how a knife is supposed to work. Okay, you gotta make sure I can get my fingers on the lock bar. All right, now thinking of, so these are some discomfort items, and I do have one example of this. Now this one isn't too bad, but this does make me a little bit crazy. I'm a huge fan of hinderers. I'm actively looking for an XM18 right now, and so one will be back in the collection soon. But there is one complaint I have. So I've got a flipper tab here. I need to push down on this tab in order to deploy the knife. All right, now this one's not bad because the detent is pretty much where it needs to be. It's a little soft actually, so this is fairly comfortable. But the thing that makes me nuts here is, why is this hooked up? Right? You put a point right where I have to push. That seems like a massive oversight. Okay, how about, and this knife is a little bit guilty. It's got a point. It's again, it's pretty comfortable because everything is rounded and the detent is dialed in as it should be. But too many times, and the best knife I've ever seen for this is the Curtis, my Curtis F3. It literally has a nice little indent for your finger to just fit right into, so that when you flip the knife, it's like a little button. And in other areas, right? Look in your car, look on your computer, look anywhere else. If there's something you have to push on, it's generally comfortable to push on, right? So make sure that you thought about that when you were putting the flipper on your knife. Okay, moving on to my next point. Let's see if I have one that does this. I don't have a lot of good examples here. I can show you anyway. So this one almost commits this crime. Okay, that's close. So we got a top swedge here, and I like top swedges. It's a nice design choice. It makes the knife visually interesting, but I've seen too many knives where this swedge is extended all the way back to the handle, and then when I go to grip the knife, especially in a saber grip, which is basically my most used grip. Maybe some of you are more hammer grip guys. And this knife does commit this sin a little. If I choke up with the choil, my thumb ends up landing up here on the back of the spine where it's thin, right? Well, I don't want a thin spot to push on. I want a thick spot. So I can adjust my grip and get it here like this, and that's fine. But I shouldn't have to. I should have enough of a bit of a landing strip here that I can put my finger where it needs to go to cut stuff with that tool. All right, so that's another big one. Thinking of big ones, Nick Shabaz's favorite complaint, okay, is the knife cuts me when it's closed. Okay, so that's, if I can rub my finger back here and touch the blade, that's a bad, bad, bad thing, right? I shouldn't be cutting myself on a knife when the knife is closed. That's exactly the opposite of how a folding knife is supposed to work. All right, and I've got one more here under this heading, and this knife almost gets there, but it doesn't. There are other knives that I've had that this is a real problem. Okay, so I look at a picture of this knife, okay, and what do I see here? Well, I see what appears to be a front finger choil, and I go, oh, that's really nice. I like front choils because I like to be able to choke up on the knife some of the time, depending on what kind of cutting task I'm doing, okay? Well, I buy the knife, I get it in my hot little hands, and when I grip it, it turns out, this is like this size. It just looked bigger in the picture, and now my finger can't fit without putting half my finger on the blade, which obviously isn't gonna work. Okay, so I now have just a giant sharpening choil. And why? Okay, the sharpening choil doesn't need to be that big. All it needs to do is give space. Here's a good example, right? It's not very big. It's just a little bit of space so that the blade comes to an end. The secondary bevel comes to an end before the plunge grind comes down. Okay, that's all a finger choil, that's all a sharpening choil needs to do. It doesn't need to be this massive thing. And if you make it a massive thing, you're taking away useful cutting edge from me, the end user. So don't do that. If you're gonna put a choil, put a finger choil. And if you're not gonna put one, don't put one, right? Okay, imagine, this knife, but now this edge came right back to here. And so I've got this huge area of unused space. Don't do that. It's just a waste of space. And it's something that as a reviewer, I'm going to complain about. And as a customer, I'm going to think your knife has a finger choil. And when I go to put my finger in it, I'm like, oh, it doesn't, right? So make it either a finger choil or a sharpening choil, not some weird in-between thing that doesn't work doesn't work very well for either one. All right, that's my main complaints and gripes. I've got a few more, okay, that I want to touch on as they relate to materials. And I've got some good examples right here. So actually, let's move some of these out of the way. Here is my Rat Model 1. All right, it's got the D2 and it's got the carbon fiber, but the carbon fiber that they use here is not super attractive carbon fiber. It has a really cheap look to it. And I think all of you guys know what I'm talking about. The carbon fiber that we're used to seeing on Gonzos and a few other things, that it's fine and it's kind of a nice visual touch on a cheap knife, but it's a cheap knife. And so our expectations aren't that high. And on this knife, I'm completely happy with this carbon fiber. All right. But if I bought this knife, and it came and it had the same carbon fiber, I would be hugely disappointed because it looks cheap. And now I've got a $200 knife that looks like I stopped at the local gas station and got the cheapest thing that they had. And that is horrible. And I will say there's one big, there's one company that does this an awful lot. There are actually two that come to mind right away, but the main one, because I'm a huge fan, is Cold Steel. Cold Steel's carbon fiber is the worst. Okay, now listen, if you're a Cold Steel fanboy and we're about to get mad at me right now, I love Cold Steel. Go back, look at my reviews. I have positively reviewed so many Cold Steel knives that I often get accused of being a Cold Steel fanboy, and I embrace it. I am. I love Cold Steel knives. The Formax is one of the greatest things that's ever been invented. I love it. Okay, I do. But on there's one about midnight or something, and there's the Storm Chaser or Storm Cloud or Storm Crow or something. But anyway, there's some expensive Cold Steels with carbon fiber that is the ugliest carbon fiber ever. And I feel like, Lynn Thompson was walking through the carbon fiber supplier and said to his guys, look, let's pick any carbon fiber in here as long as it only costs $1 a square foot, right? I have to tell you a story, guys. I was in Walmart the other day, and this mother and kid, right? And this is the imagery that I get when I think of buying this kind of carbon fiber. Okay, this mother and kid walk into the cereal aisle, and the mother says to the kid, I'm walking the other way so I can see both their faces. The mother says to the kid, you can get any cereal you want. And the kid's eyes get huge, and he looks at the cereal like, dun 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 dun, right? This is going to be the best day ever. But then she finishes the sentence and says, as long as it's between here and here. And she puts her two hands out and motions to that little section of cheap Walmart brand cereal. And and the kid's heart just breaks. You can visually see the look on his face, just like, whoa. And I'm walking the other way trying not to laugh because it's hilarious. But when I picture, Viper knives and Cold Steel knives going to the carbon fiber store, that's what the manager, like, okay, guys, you designers can pick any carbon fiber you want as long as it's this cheap, ugly one right here, okay? And please don't do that. All right, so cheap carbon fiber, number one. Number two, cheap steel on expensive knives. Okay, if I pay over $100 for a knife, it better not have VG10. All right, it better not have 14C28 or 12C28N or N690. Okay, these are not good steels. Quit using them, especially the European companies seem to love N690. They think it's this super high-end, crazy awesome steel, and it's not, right? Don't use it. So there's a couple companies that are really bad. I will say I've got to pick on Spyderco a little bit here. There's some really nice, expensive Spydercos out there. And then they have S30V. And you're like, no, I wanted this to be something special. I saved up for this. This was going to be like the crowning knife of my collection. And you put this random everyday, this ordinary everyday steel in it. Now, S30V is a good steel. It's fine. I'm not complaining about S30V, but if I'm buying an expensive, if I'm paying $250, $300, $350, I want something special. I want something unique. I want something that every knife doesn't have. And so you can't put S30V on those knives. All right, not because it's not a good steel, but because of what you're marketing. You're marketing something special and interesting. Okay, same is true of SOG with putting AUS-8 on a $70 or $80 knife, right? AUS-8 is fine for a $15 Gonzo, but it's not fine for a $70 or $80 anything, okay? You gotta stop doing that. And anyway, I know you're looking at the bottom line, but so are your buyers, okay? And they're gonna look at that $80 knife and go, AUS-8? $80 does not compute, so they're going to just pass, right? Finally, let's touch on the last one, and that is plastic feeling handles. The Benchmade Griptilian is the worst for this, but I've had other knives as well. Now, I'm not complaining about FRN. There are lots of knives with FRN that I like. The Endura is a great knife. The Delica is too small, but it's okay. Otherwise, the Para 3 lightweight, the Para 2 lightweight with it, which is upcoming, I'm sure. In fact, someone was recently telling me they'd seen samples of it. So, FRN is fine. It's not that it's a bad material, but some of them, okay, the Manixes, the Manix lightweights, they feel cheap. They're not. They're good knives. They're strong knives. I've actually had a couple of them and used them and had no issues. But they don't feel like I'm going to have no issues, and that matters. When, to me anyway, it matters how it feels. And so I don't want this thing to feel like a plasticky, cheap piece of junk. I want it to feel substantial. I want it to feel strong, okay? So there you go. Those are my primary complaints about materials. So we've covered materials, we've covered ergonomics, things that make a knife uncomfortable or hard to handle in hand, and things that are sort of design choices that I have problems with. Okay, I'd love to hear your comments down below. And here are my final thoughts. And this kind of goes back to something we mentioned on the way through. If you are making a knife, understand that we in the knife community, your buyers, we love these things, right? We have to save up for them. We're buying these when we could be buying all kinds of other things. And we want it to be special. We want it to be something that it feels like someone paid attention to, that someone put some effort into. And so when we get a knife and it has a sharp lock bar or flipper tab, when it's got cheap steel or cheap materials, when there's a huge glaring issue with fit and finish, or the lockup isn't good or something like that, it says to us, man, whoever made this doesn't care as much as I do. And so it really puts us off, right? If all of the companies here and all of the companies out there and everyone watching this would say, hey, we're making something that people are going to enjoy. Let's take a little bit of pride in what we're making. Let's make something special. Let's deliver a product that is outstanding. We wouldn't have these discussions, okay? We wouldn't, because you'd think we're making something special and the buyer would say we're buying something special, and it would be reflected in the quality and the thoughtfulness of what is going out. All right. And so, I've got to, if you're Spyderco, don't put a spoon clip on everything, right? Hey, and the spoon clip works great. And we've already talked about milling clips that don't work, but don't do that either. All right. But anodize something, make something, do something interesting, demonstrate that you care and you're trying to deliver your customers something unique and interesting, because people invest a lot in a knife that they want to be special, and they want the manufacturer to feel like they're making something special as well. And it's when they don't, it's that dichotomy that really causes the problems. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out those links. I know it's a long video. I bet the conversation will be great here. And if you're a knife maker, please don't take any of this the wrong way. I know sometimes I sounded a little, excited and passionate, and I am passionate about this stuff. But what I really want is everyone to be able to make and buy and use great knives, and that's the purpose of this video. Again, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.